Well, hello everyone, and welcome to what I've called A1 of Presence-Centered Leadership. We are running through a series here, and welcome to anyone that's joining me for the first time. We are going to go through we're going to go through these 10 sessions. I've got a number of modules that I'll be going through. But this first one is the journey of leadership. I believe, honestly, with all my heart, there's never been a time when we have needed leaders more. We need across the world to raise up men and women who are godly, I would say statesman-like leaders in every sphere of influence. And so I've written out this very simple introduction to a number of things that I teach in greater detail elsewhere. And for somewhere around 15 minutes, I'm going to go through each one of these themes. And tonight we're on A1. We had a look at the introduction the other night. We're having a look at something that I'm a little bit known for as it's a quote, as a phrase that I use, and that is, he wastes nothing. And so these are the truths of and beliefs of the leader's journey. And they're from my life. I didn't make these up. They're the experience of my life. And I want to encourage every one of you, if you are a leader or you aspire to be a leader, I want to encourage you to go after right away at the beginning of this, and I'll be jumping on here every 2 or 3 days for 10 or 15 minutes, and I'll be leaving you with some simple actions on each one. But this first one, which I include as well in my whiteboard coaching, is one of the keys for whiteboard coaching. These 4 truths or beliefs of the journey. Number 1, believe your story. Do you? I want to challenge you. Do you believe your story? Let me tell you, it's very easy. We sit in meetings. We've got these great men and women of God that we sit and listen to. I sat under the leadership, of course, of Bill Johnson for 15 years. And it's easy to believe his story, to look at the way that God has used him and introduced him to different people and blessed his hunger and his passion. And it's easy to sit there, or a Randy Clark or a John Arnott or many others, and to believe their story. But here's the real question. Do you believe yours? I want to tell you something. When you believe your story, it's where your authority comes from. And I love the picture, and I learned this from Dr. David Ireland, and I heard him preach a few years ago, that when Jacob leaned on his staff, this is what he was doing. He was believing his story. When I say believe, what I mean is, can you trust it? Can it take the weight of your life? Can your story take the weight of your life? Can you lean on it? You see, the staff that Jacob was leaning on was a staff that would have been marked. They'd have cut it and perhaps even marked the dates on there, and it would have been marked with the testimonies of their life. And so leaning on the staff was leaning on the record of their life, the children being born, the marriages, the wrestling with the angel, the great breakthroughs of his life. When he leaned on his staff, what he was saying was, what scripture is telling us is, he believed his story. Do you believe your story? Can you trust your story? Sue and I will often look at each other and say, he's never let us down before. And he's not about to start now, because he is who he says he is. Do you believe your story? I want to encourage you. And in order to do that, you probably need to be taking note of some of the detail. I could go into a lot of detail about this from my personal life story, but I want to just challenge you with that. See, Sue and I, we have a story of being healed of infertility, and we believe that story. That's why we pray for people wherever we go for breakthrough, and we see breakthrough because we believe our story, and God releases authority through our belief, through our faith, because we can lean on it, we can trust it. I'm going to go to the bottom row here, and 2 other huge principles. He redeems the lows. Job 19:25, I know that my Redeemer lives. Job could say, I know that my Redeemer lives. Redeem means to restore something to its original value. And here's the beautiful thing about our Redeemer. He makes things more valuable than they were before they got damaged or broken. He is Redeemer. And this is an absolute truth that we all need to grab hold of on our leadership journey. Otherwise, we'll beat ourselves up and we'll drag ourselves down instead of realizing that he wants to lift us up because he wants to promote us, which isn't promoting us upwards. It's taking us forwards. He redeems the lows and they become our strength. They become that which we can give away to other people. He is Redeemer. It's who he is. And, you know, he's sometimes accused of sending bad stuff. And it's not true. What happens is bad stuff happens. And as soon as he touches it, it looks beautiful. And he does such a great job of it that people think he must have sent the trash. He didn't send me cancer to teach me a lesson. He sent Jesus to teach cancer a lesson. He redeems the lows, an important truth for our leader journey. And he repeats the highs, the testimonies, the victories, the successes, the spiritual ones, the less kind of obviously spiritual ones. He repeats them. Revelation 19:10, the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Vital for the leader's journey to be able to grab hold of their victories and know that he repeats them. And that this is another strength for us as we lead people. You see, we lead people by leaning on our staff, saying, I trust my story. We lead people by saying, he redeemed me. And we help to pick other people up and say, what he did for me, he'll do for you. You've only got to look at the stories in the Bible. I've been reading David recently, quite a lot, actually. And it is extraordinary. He didn't by any means get it all right, did he? But God's Redeemer. God heard his Psalm 51 prayer. And he'll do that for me, and he does that for you. And we can lead other people. We can lift other people up out of their pit. And he repeats the highs. He repeats the testimonies. This is the great strength. And it's something that we're able to repeat to ourselves, to share the testimony of what God has done. And then, top right, he wastes nothing. The title of this session, A1, he wastes nothing. I want to tell you with absolute certainty and with absolute authority, I know this is true. I know this is true. It's Romans 8:28. All things work together for good to those that love God and are called according to his purpose. He wastes nothing and he gets you ready. I could take you right the way through from the moment that I heard God call me into what I then would have called full-time ministry in 1975, that took me to training as a nurse. 30 odd years after I finished being a nurse, I lead medical healing conferences because he wastes nothing and he gets you ready. I worked in prison. I learned strategic planning, paid for as it were by the prison service, paid for in Egypt and used in the promised land. And today I travel around the world and teach and practice strategic planning with a kingdom perspective. He wastes nothing. This is so important because sometimes we can get our head down in the grit and the grind of our journey as we're traveling on a journey, as it doesn't feel as though it's worked out yet. And we can find ourselves frustrated. God, you called me to be a leader. When are you going to give me my people? When am I going to get to lead? I'm going to tell you, he wastes nothing and he gets you ready. I could give you detail after detail. I could give you the 4 still small voice experiences of my life and tell you he wastes nothing. He gets you ready. I can tell you that my wife's grandfather was the president of the European Christian Mission, and that some 30 odd years after I heard the call of God on my life, Sue and I sat and held a book that man wrote the foreword for, the book Tortured for Christ, the story of the great Richard Wurmbrand. And we held that first edition, that tattered book in our hands and looked at each other and said, we're going back to Europe. Europe's our inheritance. He wastes nothing. Nothing. As he called me to be a part of Awakening Europe, the first 3 Awakening Europes, I knew what to preach, not because I was clever, but because there were marks it was so clear. Germany, I would preach because my father walked those streets, and I would talk to the fatherland about the fathers standing up again. I would go to Stockholm and talk about spiritual Stockholm syndrome. I would go to Prague and say, your daughters are carried in their arms because that's where my wife's mother was born. He wastes nothing, and he gets you ready. Presence-centered leadership means that believing our story, he's in the center of it. It means that in the midst of the low times, he's in the center of it because he redeems. It means that in the highs and in the victories and in successes, it's he alone that has enabled us to travel those journeys and to reach those high points. And he is in the center, and he wastes nothing. All things work together for good to those that love God. I want to tell you something. That word purpose, it's an interesting word. You know, the word purpose, it's a Greek word, and it's translated two different ways in the New Testament. The Greek word is prothesis, and it's either translated showbread or purpose. Now, they're two distinct, different uses of the word, like we have often in English, where there's two distinct uses of a word that's spelt the same. But is it a coincidence? All things work together for good to those that are called to be in the presence of God. Our ultimate purpose, the showbread, placed, presented, the bread of the presence. Purpose and presence are inseparable. I want to encourage you on this journey of presence-centered leadership. Remember the verses I shared in the introduction where David said, we've got to get the ark back, which for me is the presence, the power, the provision, and the principles of God. Or Moses, who said, I'm not going if you don't go with me. He was very clear. Or the beautiful translation of the Lord's Prayer in the Passion Translation, where it's translated, may you be the center on which our lives turn. Or that extraordinary verse where David said, God, you wrote on me. You wrote on me this pattern. You see, we need him. We need his presence. We need him right at the center of all that we say and do in leadership, at the center of our journey, believing your story with him in the center of everything. As it were, conducting the threads and the steps and the journey of our lives. Or knowing that even in our darkest times, in the grind and the grit of getting there, of those night shifts that I spent working in prison or being trained in riot training, which wasn't my favorite thing to do, he's there and he will redeem those lows. Or that he is right in the middle of the high points, the victories, the successes. It's him that enables them to happen by his blessing and favor on our lives. And absolutely, he wastes nothing. He gets us ready. He sees every step of our journey, and he knows what shape it will take in the future. These are vital truths for presence-centered leadership. It's the journey of leadership, and it's not always glamorous. And sometimes it takes us to psychiatric nursing or general nursing or riot training or being a prison officer or doing long, boring, lonely nights. But it's a journey, and he wastes nothing, and he gets you ready. Father, I pray everyone watching this will believe their journey, and they'll be able to lean on the staff and trust that what God has done before, he will do again. Thanks for listening to me on this episode A1, He Wastes Nothing, of the first module of the journey of leadership, presence-centered leadership. Bye for now.